I gotta turn that off.
That's the speaker. It's that little blue text. Might not be able to.
I was gonna say, I'm not in the meeting yet, so I'm not sure it matters. You've got a thing there to let me in.
Yes,
If you let me in, then maybe.
just keep yourself mute.
Yeah, so say join with computer audio.
And can't hear you yet. All right, now I gotta make sure I'm,
And then go down.
Yeah.
okay, see you. Here, let me shut the recording. Okay.
Now switch.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending what is sure to be an amazing presentation that addresses climate change in the global community. Our presenter, Dr. Kim Cameron, wears many hats. She holds a PhD in plant physiology. She's taught biology courses at SUNY Cortland, and she's worked as a research scientist at Cornell University. She's the owner of CNY Tutoring LLC, a tutoring service that helps students in high school and college obtain their educational goals. She is also actively engaged in her community. She's one of us, CCAA. She also was our secretary. She serves on the Climate Smart Community Committee, the Tully Free Library Board, and the Song Lake Property Owners Association. Her interest in plastics and the harm they cause led her to become involved with Beyond Plastics, a national group, and she volunteers also for its Speakers Bureau, and she was motivated to start a local chapter. As an environmentalist, a parent, a grandparent, she's passionate about educating communities about climate change and the significant threat of plastics in our environment. In her free time, and you have to kind of wonder where she finds it, Kim loves to hike, to camp, to canoe, and enjoy the outdoors. Tonight, she plans to share with you her unique perspective on climate, having participated as a non-voting delegate at COP28, representing the League of Women Voters from the Cortland area. Having seen Kim's presentation in the past, I can guarantee that you will truly have in-depth knowledge of what went on when many nations of the world got together to talk and explore solutions to our climate concerns. Kim, you're on.
Thank you. Roseanne, thank you for that amazing introduction. That can't be me that you were talking about.
national organization. We have local groups, we have state group, and then we have national organization as well. At the national level, we have what is called.
You were muted. Now I don't know how to, get me. I unmuted myself. Try it again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Sonia had said you were muted. so-
Oh, okay. That might be better. At the national level, we have what is called delegate status at the UN. And we have that, we received it when the UN was formed, thanks to Eleanor Roosevelt. And we've had that status ever since. And so this gives us the right to, if asked, talk about women's issues as well as environmental issues. With that ability, we also are invited to attend UN events. There are four League of Women Voter of women who are in charge of the UN side of things. So 2 of them are in New York and 2 of them are in Geneva, and they represent us for the entire league. And as such, this past COP28, when we were in Dubai, we were allowed to bring 6 representatives for each of the 2 weeks. So 6 for each week, basically. And I was one of the people chosen to be a representative of the US League at COP28 in Dubai. So that gives you a little background of what I was up to. And I will say right now, I'm sure everybody in this room understands what COP28 is. That is UN Climate Conference. I have been floored by the number of people who have no idea what COP28 is or what it stands for. They look at you blankly like it doesn't even exist. And part of my talk tonight is, I think this is a problem. I really think that this is a problem because climate pollution, we really have a pollution problem. It is a global problem. It is not just a United States problem. And we're going to have to tackle it from a global perspective. And too many people in the United States are looking at this from, there you go, you got somebody else, are looking at this from just a perspective of the United States. And that is not going to get us where we need to go in the future. Well, right, that didn't work. Try it this way. There we go. So I thought I would walk back in time a little bit to the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015 by, I think it's 148 countries or parties as they are called at the UN, as well as the European Union. The 3 key elements of the Paris Treaty was to limit our temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And also to look at, review the country's commitments to cutting their emission goals every 5 years. They had 2 years to ramp up, and then it was 5 years from 2017. So 2023 was the first time we were looking at their reviewing the commitments. And then the third thing was to provide climate financing to developing countries so that they could deal with the issues associated with climate pollution due to primarily developing countries polluting the environment.
Also, water level rise.
Absolutely, water level rise would be considered one of the effects of climate change. But there was also a second agenda that was established in 2015 that we don't hear as much about. Gavin,
nodding your head like, yeah, we really, really don't. And that was a 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And these two things, the Paris Treaty and this agenda, have to work together in order to reach our ultimate goals. So we kind of aren't paying much attention to them. They had 5 areas. The first one over there, they're all P's, okay, if I can get these right, I'll see without going to my notes. The first one over there on the right was people, keeping them out of poverty, lifting them out of poverty. We need to do it on a global perspective. Protecting the earth down here on the left, something, again, if we degrade our environment, which is what we're doing with pollution, then we will not have anything for the future generations. We are reducing the carrying capacity of our earth, basically.
Yep.
Prosperity.
Sonia says you're walking off camera.
Oh, sorry about that, Sonia. Okay. I'll stay right here. Okay. Prosperity is the grain up at the top. The idea that we should all be able to have a living wage and live in prosperity. We should not have to starve to death to live on earth. There is plenty of resources if we use them properly. Peace, which is in the middle right there. We need peace on earth, right? I think that goes without saying. And the final one is partnership. We need to all work together in order to achieve these goals. Okay. We all need to work together in order to achieve these goals. And from that idea came the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Maybe you've heard of them, you've seen them. I'm not sure we've really embraced them in this country, but I think we should. And that is part of my talk tonight, is we need to start thinking that we are part of a global society. These goals were designed not just for other countries, they were also designed for us. And I think we need to elevate them and educate the public about both of these, not just the Paris Treaty that people I think know about, but also these sustainability goals and how we achieve the goals of the Paris Treaty Agreement. And I'm sure all of you have seen them. I mean, they're very lofty. Please don't get me wrong. It's not like we're going to achieve them tomorrow, but they are goals for us to aim towards. Now, with that, I thought I would get into actually going to Dubai for COP28. And Jan, my husband, Jan, will tell you, I usually am not nervous when I travel. I was incredibly nervous on this particular trip. I was convinced that my paperwork wasn't going to be good. I wasn't going to get to go. Something was going to happen. Not much did. Yes, a plane. I missed a plane. Yeah. I think I was in Chicago in a snowstorm, and I think we spent 4 hours driving around in the plane on the tarmac. Yes, de-iced, yeah. So I spent a lot of time in Paris, basically just sitting there waiting, visualizing that you were supposed to be able to get good food in Paris, but I was in the airport and they don't seem to have food anymore in Paris airport. So or at least nothing worth talking about. But once I arrived in Dubai, this gives you an idea. It was a beautiful facility. As you walked in, you saw all those. I'm coming back, Sonia. As you walked in, you saw all those flags of all the countries. You could walk down this beautiful alleyway where they had coverings, and it was a wonderful facility. That graph that you see down there at the bottom on the right there, that was what we called the blue zone. That was the region which was covered by the UN. So anything that happened in the blue zone was under the jurisdiction of the UN, whereas there was also a green zone, which I don't have a picture of, but that was on the jurisdiction of Dubai. So you could do different things in different places, essentially. And that picture right there does not give you an idea of scale. If anyone knows me, you know that I walk very fast. It would take me 15 minutes to walk from that little red dot in the middle there, right here, to one of these ends over here, because it was that large a facility. And each one of those boxes that you see there, those were buildings, and in each one of the buildings, there would be housed, usually a country would have an area, and there'd be multiple countries in each one of the buildings with separate entrances around the building. And there were other buildings which were for NGOs. There was women's, there was finance, there was nature, there were a whole bunch of other buildings that are also in here as well. So you can imagine it was what you might call slightly overwhelming for somebody who had never been there before. We'll get into that in a minute. But at the same time, this is what it looked like in Dubai. And in the middle picture there, in that middle picture would be what I would see on the light rail that you could take from my condo that we're staying in. This is a picture from my condo. I could literally walk out the door from my condo, go down the elevator, out the door, walk over those, I think there were probably 15 lanes of traffic, to the light rail, take the light rail directly to the facility. As you can see, you might notice the smog every day. If any of you know AQIs, it was 130 every day. And from what I understand, talking to people, that was about normal. At the same time, if I went 2 blocks in the opposite direction, I would get to the man-made lake, with the amazing buildings all around. And yes, you can see that party boat. I'm sure those were people who were attending COP28, were having a good time in the evening. That was not me. But there was a lot of money flowing around, and shall we just kind of put it that way. And I just want to give you one last picture, and that is, if you see the far end one, what Dubai looked like in 1975 compared to what it looks like now. We were there while they were celebrating their 50th anniversary of statehood, of countryhood, whatever it's called.
Kim, you mentioned 15 lanes. Do they have decent public transportation?
Did you hear anybody at the door?
Most of it's private car. I mean, they're buses, and
Wait a
they have a light
second.
rail that goes back and forth.
Right.
Oh, and I mean, it's large. It took, from where we were, it would probably take us 20-25 minutes to get to the facility, but it was an hour from the facility to the airport. So, I mean, and that was built up the entire way. So there's,
The development model, it's really not the go, because it's based on private cars.
I don't think they cared when they started developing. It's basically desert, right? I mean, and that you can see that in the picture that this was desert. And recently, I don't know if you saw the news recently that they had a major rainstorm in Dubai. My heart did not break that they had major flooding. I think they had 2 years worth of rain in one day, something of that nature. 2 years worth of rain, and it flooded all over the place. What you were saying, David.
Kim, ironic that the UN picked Dubai to have this environmental conference. I mean, do you know how that was chosen?
I do not know the process by which it is chosen. I do know that it is, the UN incorporates all countries. And so it moves around from one place to another. I do not know the specifics about how it is chosen. I do know the next one is in Azerbaijan, which is going to be even worse than Dubai as far as I am concerned. But that is where the next one is. So, and 2030 will be in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, there are a lot of politics involved in the UN. There is no doubt whatsoever about that. And we are at the forefront of those politics as well. So this was a year for the global stock take, right? We mentioned that every 5 years, we look at the countries, how are they doing? These were the types of things they were trying to find out. Are we actually doing a just transition away from fossil fuels beginning this decade? Are we, we have to end and reverse the destruction of nature. We must align with biodiversity. And we have to include all peoples, indigenous people, women, youth. All of these are critically important in climate solutions. What was not talked about was the land sector, anything to do with agriculture, forestry, natural land protection. That was not included in the global stock take. And we'll talk about at the end what the global stock take ended up being. But every country has nationally determined contributions that they have agreed to. And this is critically important. And this gets back to what George was saying a while ago. This gives you what the US is doing. Okay. And if we look at this graph, we can see that emissions, US greenhouse gas emissions were higher in 2005. And so we base a lot of things off of 2005. And the goal is to reduce and by 17% below 2005 numbers in 2020, and then reduce it further by 2025. Now, we're not quite there, but look at the final. We're supposed to get to 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. Just get your head around that. Okay, that is a steep decline. And I am with the League of Women Voters. I am nonpartisan, but I will point out some facts. And the fact is that in June 1, 2016, no, 2007, what year did Trump get into office? 2017. See, I block things out. 2017, he pulled us out of the Paris Treaty Agreement. As soon as President Biden got into office, he put us back in the Paris Agreement. But past President Trump has already announced very vocally that if he gets reelected, he will remove us from the Paris Treaty Agreement again. So that green will disappear completely. There is no hope that we will get anywhere near those levels if we are not engaged with the global population in dealing with climate change.
State governments help. I mean,
Oh, absolutely. The state governments are doing everything they possibly can. A couple of them, yes, I would say some of them are, some of them aren't. New York State is, and I don't want to speak on that. There are others in the room which know a lot more about the what the state is actually doing regarding overall reduction in greenhouse gases. But I will talk a little bit about that.
Kim, do you know, like between 2022 or 23 and 24, has it actually come down?
Yeah, well, yeah, it has come down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a problem because we had COVID in there. Okay, so everything is skewed because of COVID.
Right.
So we did drop, but then we went back up. So we really have to look at an average. Yeah, we'll see some numbers in a minute. Okay. Um, and also this is where money is, all right? So especially at this particular COP, this was the first COP where they really embraced the business world, shall we say. This is the first time where there were a lot of lobbyists there, not just us NGOs, for instance. There were a lot of non-NGOs there too. Yeah. Something like, I think there were 1,900, which was a 200% increase of the fossil fuel lobbyists were there. Yeah, that is nothing in comparison to the numbers. There were 70,000 people at COP 28. So 1,900 doesn't seem very much, but for some reason, those people seem to get a lot closer to the delegates than the rest of us do. You know, but that said, you know, in Dubai, they were really pushing money and pledges. Everybody was pledging all over the place. In fact, there was a big, I don't have a picture of it here, but there was a big tower, and every day they would put this picture up showing how much, and the numbers would change on a daily basis. But I want to point out a few things here that I think are really important. Let's look at those numbers. Okay. So they're pledging, countries all over the world are pledging for energy financing. Really, that's what we're talking about here. $6.8 billion. And that makes sense. We need to have energy transition. So we need to put a ton of money into this. This is a huge lift, right? Finance, lives and livelihood. I'm not positive I understand exactly what lives and livelihood is, but that is another fund that is funding changing people's lives, I guess. Inclusion, 1.7 billion. These are, you know, broad terms. The Green Climate Fund, 3.5 billion. You can look up each one of these funds and find out what they're doing and how people can apply for money from each one of these funds. They, in theory, are trying to make it very simple to apply. But you know, loss and damage, it's not doing so well. It's a pittance. And adaptation is a mere pittance. And then least developed countries fund, I mean, it's insulting to some extent, some of these things. So there isn't money going to loss and damage or adaptation. And I think that, again, gets back to this idea that we need to think globally. The problem is occurring because we are the country that is polluting. The solutions need to be global. Because, as I will point out, it affects everyone and it affects us, basically. But at the climate conference, it's not just delegates coming together. Oh, and I might add, if you remember that picture of that, like the wing image of the layout of the facility, well, all the delegates were at the very front as you walked into the complex. Those where all the air conditioned rooms were, and the suites were. Okay. All the other buildings were not air conditioned or anything else of that nature. So, but we had to make sure that those delegates were, well, treated kindly, so to speak. But the real thing, not only bringing all those delegates together, and that was incredibly important. Please don't get me wrong. Incredibly important to get everybody in the same room talking about this stuff. But we also have all these other organizations that get together too. So this is a huge event that brings people together from multiple different areas. 70,000 people, as a matter of fact. The energy is unbelievable, even for all the NGOs. So you have youth, children, education, health, food, agriculture, nature, oceans, you name it. And they're all in these pavilion-like areas, and they're all giving talks. And they are up and running with displays. It is 2 weeks of just energy. And it's not that well organized. So to give you an idea, if you want to know what's going on in any of these pavilions, you got to go to the website for that pavilion to find out what their schedule is. So many of them have QR codes and they have some apps and this and that. The country information also, I mean, the countries are also doing presentations and displays and everything else like that. And those, they populate a calendar the morning of. It gets populated like 5 a.m. in the morning. So if you were planning to spend the day there, and it's a lot of people, so you got to get in there early. So I would leave at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was really close. I mean, we could just come down the elevator, out the door, around the corner, get on the thing, and we're there in half an hour. Other people had to travel an hour and a half to get there. But you get there at 7:30, maybe 8 o'clock in the morning because you don't want the crowd. You got to go through security. If you get the crowd, you could be an hour or two in security. So you're desperately trying to figure out what your day is going to look like. And it is a bit of bedlam. There is no doubt about that. It's a bit overwhelming, but the energy is also unbelievable at the same time. And just to give you an idea, the interconnectivity between all of these things. And the example I give here is heat. As heat increases and we have a change in our climate, what happens? There is conflict, there is migration. With migration, there is insecurity. And the people who are most impacted by that are going to be your pregnant women, your children, and your elderly. So that is just one example of the intersection between health and climate. %75% of health determinants are also monetary. So we need to recognize that as well. We were talking about adaptation, mitigation. As soon as you have to migrate, you're going to lose money. And that is true here in the United States too. It's not just in other countries. If we look at all of the effects that are taking place now here, people are already having to migrate. We just don't think about it quite the same way, but they are. People are leaving more vulnerable places. They try not to go very far because they don't want to leave their homes and they don't want to leave their families, but they are beginning to migrate.
I actually ran into these are professionals, so it's slightly different, but I know in the last 2 months, 2 professionals that migrated because of climate change. I found it fascinating. One was a woman from Arizona. No, pardon me. One was from the Bay Area, and they got sick and tired of the smoke from the fires. And the other person, I think, was from Arizona. The heat.
Yep.
They and I met at a conference a guy from Arizona that said that in the summertime when they had that really hot temperatures, they had oven mitts on the metal door handles. Whereas if you touch the door handle, you burn your hand. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but that happened in I think it was in Phoenix.
But yeah, no, actually people fall. people fall down and they burn themselves. They get third-degree burns.
Yeah.
So- Jim,
Yeah, the
Oops.
numbers I have heard, like in the last decade, migration has been, because of the conflicts in the Middle East and Africa, has been of tens of millions in the last decade, the largest since World War II. I heard that once, when we get down the way a few decades, it's going to be hundreds of them. And when you just look at how migration has contributed politically, the political in the world, the rise of authoritarian regimes because of, nativism,
mhm.
anti-immigrant.
Instability. It's just all about instability. And let's be honest, the fossil fuel industry is all about instability too. And so we can become a more stable world by moving away from fossil fuels. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that we can make this a much more stable environment, even as we have to obviously deal with the consequences of the climate change. It is not going to go away anytime soon.
Climate change is mostly affecting agriculture, as far as I understand. Places that don't get no rain anymore,
Mhm.
in Central America and in Africa, or they have a deluge. So, and with the crops are wiped out, like in Pakistan.
Right. So there's going to be movement in terms of where crops will have to be grown. And that is also change. So where crops were grown in one place will become a place that crops won't necessarily be able to be grown. And so the people who are growing those crops were either going to have to move or they're going to have to come up with something else to do instead.
And the fertile places are more congenial to live in, so the populations are moving there and taking over the farmlands.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep.
It's insane.
Yeah, but it is what it is, and we really can't change that part. We can understand what's going on, and we can advocate and we can educate. And as I said, we can look at this from a sustainability perspective, which is something that we as a world have never done. We've always had a linear approach, use it, throw it away, and there's plenty available. The resources are infinite, and don't worry about it. We are learning very, very quickly that resources are finite and that we need to develop a circular economy. And everybody's going to school right now. I mean, that's the reality. And it takes a lot to change society. And we are ramping it up heavily right now. So if we can keep threading that needle without people going crazy, we'll be in pretty good shape, right? I mean, that's the goal. And that's why you have those 17 sustainability goals as well. So I put up here the bigwigs, the 5 multinational banks that are funding a lot of this. There is the World Bank, which is by far the largest. And then there is the European Bank, which obviously covers, well, they cover a lot of different areas. They give funding out all over the world. The Asian Development Bank is dealing with Asia and Pacific. The African Development Bank is dealing with Africa. And IDB is I should know what this is, Inter-American Development Bank, which is dealing with India in that area. So these are your 5 big major banks. And I am bringing this up because one of the meetings that I went to was a panel discussion. And I was very excited. This was a panel discussion with the president of the Inter-Americas Development Bank, the president of the Asian Development Bank. And the African Development Bank, the VP was there, as well as the president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. These were the panel, as well as somebody from Avia Investors. So these were the people who were on the panel, just to give you an idea. And like, I was sitting as far from them as you are right now. And what they were saying, I was listening to, that we're breaking through. We're starting to change the way we are giving money out, essentially. We're coming up with innovative ways to finance things. The change is occurring. And as you can see in that second half, insurance is changing. Litigation risk will not be available. So companies that are polluting our environment, that are getting sued, for instance, they have insurance against that type of litigation, but that's not necessarily going to be there for much longer. And at this point,
This Philadelphia jury came in, I think today, against Exxon for $735 million for cancer arising from benzene. The theory of the case was that Exxon knew for decades that benzene was a carcinogen. Now, I don't think that's going to stand up appeal as one person, but the theory of the case is available to lots of people. So.
and this slide here is from the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. And I've put up here, these are all of the litigation cases right now, not including the United States. And so you can start to see there are lots of suits going on, right? You can see, you should be able to use your imagination and see why maybe insurance agencies are no longer willing to risk their money with that type of funding. So this is good. This is very good. This is one prong that we need to use.
Environmental crimes, just the fact that's considered a crime now is huge.
Huge. It's huge.
Finally being seen as a real law that people need to be worried about, and countries are adopting them.
Exactly. And often companies have said polluting, we're not polluting. How can you prove we're polluting? Well, guess what? Another talk that I went to was from Al Gore. By the way, he's a fantastic speaker. It was marvelous to listen to him. I was actually sitting next to somebody from MIT, and the two of us were just jumping up and down in our seat. And I was like, did you hear that? And he's like, yeah, I can't believe it. So this is Climate Trace, which is a program that he unveiled at COP28. Interestingly enough, one of my League of Women Voter delegates with me had actually worked on this, the back end of this. She was an Arctic expert. And so she had worked on an app for this, which I thought was really cool. So she'd been working on it for a couple of years. But this program is independent greenhouse emissions tracking. And it is taken measurements of greenhouse gas emissions from 352 million assets around the globe. And I might add that this program is available to anyone and everyone. Just put it in your computer and look up Climate Trace. And you too will be able to have fun and spend hours finding I found the Tully waste treatment plant, the Syracuse waste treatment plant. You can find all sorts of things. And what I bring up here, this is data that can be used in litigation cases. So if you can prove how much a manufacturing company, for instance, is polluting, then the penalties will be very high. And before, when President Obama was in office, I believe, if I've got my numbers right, the EPA was quantifying 1 pound, I think it was, of pollution, of carbon dioxide equivalent pollution at $45. I have no idea why that happened. Okay, at $45 a ton, excuse me, a ton. 1 ton, $45 a ton. President Trump came into office and he reduced that to $5 a ton on virtually his first day in office. And then President Biden came back in office and he raised it from 45 to something like 55 to account for inflation. So at $55 a ton, if you're polluting X millions of tons per year of carbon dioxide equivalent and the judge slaps you with a fine, it will be much greater. So money counts, money talks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess without being nitpicking, to me, it's a little bit, take micron. The carbon footprint from the concrete in micron, be astronomical. So do we sue do we sue Micron? Do we sue the companies making the concrete? I mean, I guess I don't get it.
Oh, no, that's not the way it works. Usually when you have a manufacturing plant, they are allowed to emit a certain amount of pollutants into the environment. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what this is going to be able to track. So how much pollutant did the actual facility produce?
But the concrete manufacturing company is allowed.
Not the concrete manufacturing company. When the plant is up and running, it will be emitting emissions, and they will be allowed, there will be a certain amount allowed for that facility to operate. So to give you an example, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there is a plastic facility down outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that is a shell facility that only came online fully in November of 2022. And they were, what's the right word? Allowed to emit up to a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the year. And they blew through that amount in something by February of the next year. So they have been sued, and they've had to pay a fine. And now they're being sued again because they're still blowing through it all. And so, I mean, at least in this country, money does talk.
And does Project Trace focus on methane?
It focuses on methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and also carbon dioxide equivalents. So all of those. And this, just to give you an idea, if you wanted to play around with it, I just put it in New York State. And you can see here that in all sectors, all of those sectors that we just discussed, they emitted in 2022, our state emitted 125 megatons, megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents. You can see those emissions over time. We have increased since 2021 quite a bit. Okay, we need to get it down. Can you, yeah?
And I think these are violations of US environmental law that litigants, they can show they've been harmed. They bring their case to the federal government. I mean, it goes to federal courts.
Jan, can you help me on that?
Yeah, mostly if you have exceedances in air pollution, you're almost always suing a corporation that probably is domiciled in New York anyway, so you're gonna be in federal court.
A group of people like class action suit, like residents of Clay bring lawsuit against Micron if they violate certain limits.
Yeah, there's.
going on about.
Mike
Yeah,
was
so
trying
Till
to
7:30.
apply for and get permits for all the criteria pollutants that, you know, that the state has. The transition to looking at carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide actually has long been identified as a criteria pollutant, but carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents like methane have not.
They've only recently, yeah,
Well, and that was in part of what that was part of what the Supreme Court decision setbacks,
right,
major decisions.
Right. right.
Our Supreme Court appears the majority of our Supreme Court appears to be on a mission to I want to say castrate, but
Destroy the world.
yeah, well, yes, but particularly the conservative majority in the Supreme Court seems very concerned about administrative agencies, unelected administrative agencies, making decisions that Congress may not have anticipated when they passed the Clean Air Act, the Water Pollution Control Act, all those other acts.
Kim, that graph, so New York State, and my understanding is we're one of the leaders in the country.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, so if our emissions are going up, that previous graph where you showed the downward trend for greenhouse gases, if we're a leader, what am I missing?
I don't have an answer for that, yeah.
Is that a trend without the graph, or is that that's what we have to do?
Well, A, that is what we have to do, and B, if you saw, there was a little mark saying this is what we believe what it was in 2020. But the reality is it's really hard numbers to come up with, and it takes them years to come up with the numbers for years ago. So in 2020, it looked like we were below what we were anticipating. Okay, but that was also after 2019, where we know we dropped. So we went up, and you're seeing some of that basically here.
Do you think these are hard numbers on this graph?
Yeah,
That graph?
yeah,
Okay.
these are hard
I mean,
numbers.
it's just
These-
because we're.
Yeah, right. Well,
It's a snapshot.
that is a snapshot, exactly.
That doesn't represent.
Yeah, I guess it would be helpful to see 2023.
New York,
And-
to my knowledge, New York has been decreasing modestly. It's
It's not bad.
Right, right.
But it's setting the trend, so now we can track it from here on out and see how we do.
Right.
So this is
Climate,
bad.
right. Climate traces only goes back to 2021. I mean, they only just presented it. But yeah,
Sorry, just one thing I'd really add quickly on the New York State side of this is that we have
Speak up.
supposedly the strongest, climate law in the country, the CLCPA. And part of that is cap and trade guidelines. So going forward, each sector has a reduced amount they can pollute going toward our goal of net zero. And there's going to be public hearings for that. We can actually make sure those guidelines and that policy is strong and in line with international goals.
yes, thank you. Yeah, and you can see transportation is the large part of our pollution here in New York State. But more importantly, I think this is absolutely fascinating that you can click on every single one of those little dots over there, you can blow it up, you can look at it, it'll tell you exactly where it is, how much emission is there. You can look at 21, 22, have fun with it. use up your time. Evening things to do.
Reputational issues that, to the extent that some of those spots are either local landfills or
Mhm.
municipally owned, publicly owned things, or manufacturing
Mhm.
operations. They're subject to public criticism, potential consumer dissatisfaction. And since almost all of them are greenwashing, a certain degree of reputational concern.
Yes. Another thing I learned about was the C40, which is a global network of mayors from all over the world. They get together, they pass ideas around, they are working closely with one another, and they are passing information on to other mayors. So it's not just 40 mayors. It is now, as you can see in that picture down at the bottom there are more and more and more. So as somebody was saying, we have problems here in the United States. So it is the mayors who are coming to the forefront to make change occur, here in the United States for sure, but also around the world. It was fascinating to hear them talk.
What's the difference, the blue and the yellow?
I don't remember. I think some of them, I don't remember. Does that answer your question? I did know at one point, but I do not remember now.
They represent the growth from the original. Like,
Yeah, it might represent the growth from the original ones. I mean, this gives you an idea. In a lot of the talks I went to, they had a board, a whiteboard, where somebody was off to the side doing artwork, bringing together all of the ideas that were taking place in that panel discussion. Can you feel the energy yet? That was the energy that was there at COP28. And I know we disparage that, we've got all of these lobbyists there and everything else. It does not stop the energy of this transition, which is going on. It may not feel like it's going on, but guys, it is happening. Maybe not as quickly as we want, but it is. So you can see it's great. You can just, it's a lovely cartoon of everything that we're talking about.
Maybe this is a difficult question to answer, but I like process. I like to know how things happen. So when you were there, I got the sense that you went to, let's call them workshops, and you learned about things.
Mm-hmm.
But how did things get decided? Where was the voting taking place? How did the lobbying get reflected in what was decided?
So the delegates were in rooms by themselves, and they would come out and there would be discussions. Then I could have spent my entire time just sitting and listening to the delegates discussing and arguing and making very, very minor changes to the wording of different things. It's a little bit like watching paint dry. So I left that to our online representatives. So there were 6 of us there each week in person, but we were allowed to also have a number of online participants. But they couldn't go to any of the meetings. They couldn't go to the presentations or anything else like that, or talk to the people. So we kind of let them do that part. And they would be up in the middle of the night listening to pretty boring discussions. So that, I mean, it's an art. Please don't get me wrong. It's an absolute art. But I did not spend my time really listening to the delegates discuss how they were going to come up with results.
So for you, it was a learning experience.
Partly, yes, absolutely. I would like to go back, and I would like to see our league be more actively engaged, because I personally believe that democracy is an issue that is critically important. And even in countries which aren't democratic per se, they have democratic parts to them. And I feel that the League of Women Voters could easily play that role in talking about the climate and democracy and how fragile that connection is and how we need to strengthen the democracy. Because if we don't have democratic processes, we're going to have more conflict, basically. So again, this is another one, just gives you an idea. This is industry and energy, how to create low carbon steel, and what it means. We heard from the largest steel manufacturers, how they're trying to make it happen. How they're trying to make this happen. Just a lot of energy and a lot of meeting people and things of this nature. There was also a lot of advocacy and protests. They were muted. I'll be perfectly honest. You had to get permission. And if you didn't have permission, you couldn't do it. And you only had certain places that you could protest. Again, one of my partners in crime, she planned a major protest for the last day. She was my Arctic person. And she actually got permission from the UN Guterres to do this. And she spent an entire day going around Dubai and looking at what sea level rise would happen at 1 foot, 3 feet, 7 feet, and 10 feet. And 10 feet would have been in the delegates' lap, basically. So she had every intention of interrupting their discussions to announce a flood announcement at 10 feet. And it was going to cause some disruption. But ultimately, she was told it could not happen, could not take place because it might damage the floor because she was going to put down tape on the floor. Yellow hazard tape. And because of that, he changed his mind and said no. So it would have caused some trouble. But yes, we had to be careful. If you were in the UN section, you were probably fine. But you did need to be very careful outside of the UN section. She got chased off a couple of places. So
maybe they should have seen it because then they would have been prepared for their flooding.
yes, I mean, it was going to be a whole campaign. It was going to be one day they were going to talk about what it would be like at 1 foot, and then it was going to be what it was going to be at 3 feet, and then it was going to be 7 feet, and then the final was going to be 10 feet. And there were newscasters who were going to take this on, but it all got canceled. So anyway, so what actually came out of this? Those are the words, the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. We're not moving as quickly as we need to move. We are probably going to increase our global temperatures above 1.5 degrees Celsius. But, you know, the truth of the matter is we're not going to wilt if we get above 1.5. We want to keep it as low as possible. So 1.6 is a lot better than 1.7. And we need to recognize that there is not a line in the sand. There will be more consequences as we increase our temperature. And a lot of those are going to be consequences that we can't reverse. So that is always the fear, but we won't know that we can't reverse them until we're past them. So it's one of those situations where we need to keep it as low as possible on purpose because we don't know where it's going to go. So there is a mitigation gap as well. There is an adaptation is not sufficient at this point. We saw that in the beginning. Those numbers were pretty bad. We need to look at the whole economy approach, and we need to look at the gap between the needs of the developing countries and the support provided. You know, we need to increase that. So for instance, in one not quite final, but one other thought there is, just to give you a little idea, and this will probably piss off a few people, but President Biden just announced tariffs on China because they made electric cars, guys. They made cheap electric cars, and we're going to punish China for doing what we want done, because we are not thinking about this in a global perspective. We should be patting China on the back and saying, thank you. We will follow suit and do the same thing. We need more cars. We don't need less cars. That's the kind of change that needs to happen in each one of our minds. And Biden doesn't have it yet either.
Yeah, but a lot of that can, that's political. It's not, I mean.
I'm not arguing that it's political. I'm simply saying that the message we are sending out is not one of global participation. We are fighting with China over this. And yes, it is political, but we need to rise above that if we're going to solve this. Remember those 17 goals. We need to look at those sustainability development goals and apply them to every single thing we do, we read, we hear. And that includes what our government does.
Do they consider the extinction of species?
Yes, there's definitely information on the extinction of species.
Well,
Absolutely, a lot of discussion about that, a lot more discussion for the first time about oceans, a lot more discussion about health and climate at this particular COP. So there were a lot of breakthroughs that had not occurred before.
Kim, if we could go back for 1 second to China, because I think that's really important.
To what?
Well, when you mentioned China, so the
China.
they have a car that's, I think it's selling for 12,500, 100% electric.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to be actually a high quality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that would destroy the US auto industry. Ford, GM, I mean, we'll put them all out of business. But I mean, I think it's really, really difficult. You're absolutely right. It is political. And there's no easy solution.
Well, yes, and I'm not sure that I agree with you that it would put them out of business. We have done massive things in order to compete. And I would say that it would make our auto industry scramble big time. But I am not convinced that it would put them out of business. They claim it would. I will agree with that.
Yeah.
But right now, they're also claiming if we get the New York State Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, that all of these companies are going to have, it's not necessarily true.
I mean, I think part of the difficulty is we don't appreciate the seriousness of the issue. I mean, but basically, it's collective suicide.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
This century, I mean, we will not, is there anybody here that's at this point? You know,
I know.
we won't see.
They won't kick us out.
Right.
Wow.
But that's part of the challenge. You know, we're dealing with an existential crisis that literally has the capability this century of ending civilization the way we know it. But as a species, we're hardwired for the immediate. You know, we do great if this building is on fire. If the fire is 5 miles away. So
Okay.
this is really, really difficult stuff.
So I agree. It is a really, really difficult stuff, but this is the last slide that I have, and I really want to mention it. So on the right-hand side is a Museum of the Future that is in Dubai. It is a beautiful building. It is absolutely gorgeous. It is a museum that is designed to encourage people to think positively about the future. It's got a little religion in there that I don't particularly like, but on the other hand, we don't have anything like this. We don't have a sense of, oh my goodness, what can we do in the future? What that dream. And I would say that we can have that dream and we need to develop it. And I put in here on the left-hand side, this is a letter I just recently found that from my sister wrote, and she wrote it back in 1969. It's dated 7/21/69, and I just want to read a little bit. She was at camp, and she was in 9th grade, 6th, 7th grade, something of that nature. I'd have to figure it out. Just had to write you a little line. This was to my mother, because I'm so excited. I just couldn't believe it about a man walking on the moon. We sat up until 11:30 listening to the radio, and you should have seen us. When they said he stepped on the moon, there was such a shout. I ran down to my cabin and sat there screaming that I felt so great and just couldn't believe it. Later, about midnight, when I was lying in my bed, I just had felt a sort of awe. Man has stepped upon the moon. And she was 14 years old when she wrote that. We need that excitement. And I'm going to end with that note. We've had it before. We need to develop it now, today, to dream for the future. And that's it, guys. That's all I got for you.
If there's any more questions,
Yeah, can I stop sharing?
yeah. If you have questions, speak loudly, so this picks it up, so the folks on Zoom can hear.
I just, I want to thank you. It was an excellent presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention on that previous conversation that about electric cars in China and stuff, and we don't know how much coal they're burning to make those electric cars. That's just one caveat. Also, it's also one of the flags they run up every time and says we're putting coal miners in Virginia out of business and out of work and stuff. It's like we've always had changes in our industry.
Oh, yes.
And those people end up learning new trades. When lighthouses were invented, salvage operators were complaining because it means they would lose business because of lighthouses would keep ships from running aground. And they were afraid they were gonna lose business, and there was a valid concern, we're gonna go out of business, we're not gonna have salvage operators. So they were called moon cussers, by the way, but every time there was a full moon, nobody ran aground. So we're dealing. So every time I hear something about this or that, about the problems it's gonna cause when we make these changes, I just call them moon cussers. It's the same argument. So
Yeah.
we do need to make the changes, and we can do it, and we just need to do it without having individual hardships. I don't care about corporate hardship. I worry about individual hardship.
There's going to be hardships all over the place, but there's always been hardship, and hard change creates some hardships, and we have to work as a society to help those hardships, right? I mean, we've got to all work together. Some people are going to be hurt. We just cannot assume that we can not hurt anyone. We want to hurt as few as possible and help those who have been hurt.
People are being heard by the status quo.
Absolutely.
Something like 7.5 million people a year die from fossil driven airflow.
Yep.
That's just
Yep.
background noise. That's
Yep. And
accept it.
and I personally feel that our leaders need to stand up and articulate that climate change is occurring, and that we need solutions. So I was in Albany today, and that was one of the things I said to my legislator. You're a leader in our community. You need to stand up. You need to articulate that there's a problem. I've said it to other people in positions of leadership. I've said it to superintendents of schools having to do with electric school buses. Sonia, yeah.
Hi.
Superintendent will say to me, yeah, we know it's coming, but it's not ready yet. And I'm like, okay, but you know it is coming, and you need to stand up and tell the community that you are behind this, even if it maybe takes a little bit longer to get it rolled out. Sonia, I think you have something you want to say.
I have I guess a question. So this
Yeah, wait
is
a minute, hold on, I don't know how to,
Just lost.
hold on,
Something
Can
here.
you hear
hold
me?
on. I don't know how to,
Talking.
oh, can you talk now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
All right, so thank you very much for your presentation. I had a question about the sustainability goals. That's the first our group here has ever heard of them. And so I figured where I'm chair of the sustainability committee and have worked on sustainability policies, and if I haven't heard about them, others haven't. So how do we get that information out? Seems
uh,
pretty important.
yeah, absolutely. They are available on the website. I mean, you know, just Google them. You will find tons and tons of information about them. And, you know, I'm sure there are ways that we can quote unquote advertise the sustainability goals and educate people about them. I was just at Earth Fest 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago? And they were using sustainability goals there. Every booth had was labeled by its sustainability goals that it was covering, basically, and kids would run around and tick off all of the different goals. But they didn't really explain what it was, and people don't know, and they're just pretty little pictures right now. But I really think we need to incorporate them into our talk, our speaking about climate pollution.
Thank you.
I just wanted to
Speak up
say-
so we could pick it up on here.
I just wanted to say that COVID presented an example of something we thought we couldn't do. I mean, that many people out of work, that there were major corporations that folded, but for the most part, we survived because there was a strategy. There was something resembling leadership, even though it was poor. On our president's part, but there were other people that created leadership. So the same thing with climate change. If there's a will, there's a way. Universal basic income could be used, for example, to help people that are transitioning from one field to another.
Yes, absolutely. All of those things are true. I do think there is a little bit of a difference between COVID-19 and climate change. COVID-19 was a one-time event, basically. Maybe we'll get another. Okay, wait. No, it probably isn't a one-time event, but it was an event that we had to respond to.
Yeah.
But climate pollution is something that has been building over time, and we're in it. So it's a little bit like the frog in the warm water. It's heating up, and we're thrashing around a little bit, right? And the question is, can we climb our way out of it and keep our environment from being polluted? I mean, this is really a pollution situation. And I personally think that that's how we should be addressing climate change, as a pollution issue. That is something that people understand intuitively. They really do understand what pollution is. And if we look at carbon dioxide in our atmosphere as a pollutant, that is really something that we have not focused on as much as I think we should, personally. Yeah.
Kim, was there any discussion on limits?
On limits?
Yeah, limits. At COP 28.
Limits in what way? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you even mentioned it that, you know, we live under the assumption that, you know, there are no limits to things that we want. And we can, whether it's bigger houses, bigger cars, more stuff, you know, endless consumption, and everything has an ecological footprint. You know, you want to see your grandkids in California, that has a climate course to it.
Right.
So is there any discussion that as a worldwide, you know, society, we need to think that perhaps we can't have everything?
Of course, there's conversation about that, and it's a circular economy type conversation. in that we have finite resources. And so therefore we have to use our resources very carefully, and we need to reuse as much as we can and recycle as much as we can and only throw away a tiny bit. Because we're basically drowning in our own trash.
You're being recorded.
I don't.
Okay, one more question.
Not a question, I was just thinking what Peter was asking. I'm sure there are scientists, I would think, like, there was that drawdown that did a global analysis of how much CO2 and other greenhouse pollutants were being emitted by various different various different sectors throughout the world. And then it discussed how much could be brought down by certain solutions. I would bet that right now that there are some scientists out there working on describing various global scenarios based on various, amounts of CO2, carbon footprint and increase in the heat. I mean, I'm sure there's people.
Oh, absolutely. Guarantee it. Like, absolutely. There lots and lots and lots of scientists are working on this. The data is pouring in. I think personally, our role here in this room is to help educate the public, because change is not going to occur as quickly as we want it to occur if people are dragging their feet. So we need to get people on board. We need to have museums of the future. We need to have a vision. We need to have leaders who are standing up saying, we can do this. And it can't just be half of our society doing it. That is part of the problem. And that is when, Roseanne, it becomes a political issue, is when half of the society decides that it is not in their best interest to support these things. But we are only one country of many. So we have help. We are not doing this alone. And that is what the UN, why we need the UN. This is a global issue. And right now, I can't tell you how many people I talked to and said, I'm going to COP28. And they look at you and go, you're doing what? What is that? It just gives you an idea of how little people understand the global thing. They know that the ocean, that there are some turtles that are getting plastic straws in their nose. Okay. They know maybe that the Arctic is melting, but they don't really understand the picture of how we all need to work together. And I think that is our role to work on. And I leave you with that idea of how do you advocate for that? Think about how you can make a difference in that area.
Kim, thank you. I think we're echoing again. And that'll be it for tonight as we get through our echoes. Thanks again.
You're very welcome.
Good night, everyone. That was right at time to drop.
Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. See you, Sonia. Maybe one day in person.
Oh, did you miss Sonia, at the?
Yeah, I did. I don't know how to leave here. Are you leaving? Or did you close it?
I closed it. I thought I would.
I don't know. Assign and leave. I
But
can't
Since you're a co-host, you could.
you can.
assign it to Jim. Linda, Sonia.
Yeah.